In this lecture, we're going to learn about ragdolls in Unity. This is how you can have a character and apply some colliders and rigid bodies to the various body parts, and then watch them as the character falls down and gets impacted by physics. So over here, I've got my basic character. It's a simple character with a humanoid rig, and just for fun, I also set up an animator with a basic idle animation. I've made lectures on the animator and animations if you want to learn more. So on my character, I've got the skin mesh renderer, and then also the rig with all of the various bones that make up the character. So in order to make a ragdoll, just go up here into Game Object, and then go under 3D Object, and then click on the ragdoll. So this is the ragdoll wizard. Now here, as you can see, all you really need to do is just assign the various body parts. So you just find whatever body part matches this one and just drag the reference. Now, depending on the rig of your model, the names might not match perfectly, but it should have all of the parts. For example, on this one, the rig calls this one a pelvis, but on the rig, this model was downloaded from Mixamo. I covered how to download it for free in the animation avatar lecture. In this Mixamo rig, the pelvis is instead called hips. So just click and drag the reference and do the same thing for all the others. Based on the name, you should be able to identify exactly where they match. And if the name is a bit confusing, you can also look at the bone position. So for example, for the left hips, is that one the left up leg or the left leg? Well, you can just look at the bone position and you can see that the left up leg is right up there, right near the hip. Whereas that one called left leg, that one is pretty much on the knee. So that one matches up for the knee, and the other one for the one. Okay, so just assign all of them. Okay, so I've assigned all of them. Then for the settings, the total mass, this is the total mass for all of the rigid bodies that will be created. Now some bones will have a different mass. So for example, the final arm bone will have a lower mass than the chest bone. And this one is the total mass combining all of them. So if you want your ragdoll to be more or less dense, then you change this setting. But then of course, after making it, you can always change each body part individually. Then for the strength, now this one is apparently a legacy field that no longer does anything. All I could find was a very amusing thread where everyone is trying to figure it out based on the source code, and apparently really does nothing. And then finally the flip forward, also not sure what this one does, the documentation doesn't say anything about it. So I'm not entirely sure if this one flips some rotations or something like that. Okay, so just like this, just go ahead and hit on create. And yep, it automatically adds all of the colliders, rigid bodies, and joints to all of the character's body parts. So you can see, for example, this arm as a capsule collider with the size of the arm. Then it has a joint, so it's connected to this arm and so on. You can inspect them all individually, for example, for that arm. So you can see that the left forearm over here, the connecting body is the left arm, so it's connected to this one, which in turn is connected to the pelvis and so on. So just with this setup right now, if you hit on play, and actually the animator component is still active, so the character is still playing the normal animation. So the animation is driving the position, that's why it didn't fall down immediately. But if I just disable the animator component and let gravity take over, and yep, everything falls down. Alright, awesome. So as you can see, all of the colliders are correctly set up, they fall down with gravity and everything works perfectly. So you don't see any body parts being entangled and going inside others. They all work correctly. So this wizard really helps you set up all of these colliders, all of the joints, body parts, and so on. Now of course you might need to tweak some things. So for example, here on the left forearm, you might need to tweak how this joint actually rotates, and for that over here you've got an Edit Angular Limits button, and if you click on it, you get these really nice gizmos, so they tell you how the arm can bend. So if you need to tweak things, you can just click on this button to enable the gizmos, and then you can just click and drag in order to modify. So do you want more or less rotation on that axis, or maybe more or less on this axis, or maybe over here on the green one. Then of course you can also modify the anchor, the axis, swing axis, all of the springs, twist limits, and so on. So all of these things you can play around to get it working exactly as you want it. And then of course if your character is not proportioned like a normal human, then you can also just modify the size of the colliders. For example, up here, open up the capsule collider and click on the button to edit, and let's say I want this arm to be a bit shorter. There you go, that's it. Now just one very important thing on the size of the colliders, make sure you don't have colliders inside other colliders. For example, over here, if I make the forearm way too big so that it goes inside the left arm, if you do that, then yep, this happens, and as you can see, the colliders are constantly colliding, so everything is messed up. So make sure you don't have colliders inside other colliders. Alright, so here we have our ragdoll character all set up. Now, usually the main goal of a ragdoll is using it when a character dies or something. So for that, there's two ways we can do it. One way is exactly like this. So we add all of the ragdoll colliders to the character itself. And then when we want the character to die, we just disable the animator component, and yep, it falls down. So that's one approach. However, using this approach, it does mean that the colliders would be using tons of processing power for no reason. We really only want these colliders when we want to enable the Ragdoll. So a better approach is just to make the Ragdoll into a prefab, and then when the character dies, we destroy the character and instantly spawn the Ragdoll on top. That's pretty easy to do, so let's do it. First thing is over here the Ragdoll, let's just convert it into a prefab. So here on the scene I just have the character, does not have any colliders, so no Ragdoll. Now let's make a simple script so that we press a button and it destroys this object and it spawns the Ragdoll prefab. So let's just make a new C# script. And just attach the script. Okay, so here this is going to be extremely simple. Let's just add a serialized field for reference for our Ragdoll. And then on private void update, let's just do a simple input test. Let's say when we press the spacebar, let's spawn the Ragdoll. So we just call instantiate the Ragdoll prefab. Then we're going to put it on the same position as this object, so transform.position, and also transform.rotation, and then we destroy this game object. Okay, very simple, let's test. So there's my character playing the idle animation. Now I press the button, and yep, the character is gone, turns into a Ragdoll, and falls down. Okay, so far so good. So the logic worked, but obviously it doesn't look correct. So right now the character is on idle, and when I spawn the Ragdoll, it spawns in the T-pose. We want the Ragdoll to be spawned in the exact same pose. So for that, over here in our code, let's just add some simple logic. Really, all we need to do is cycle through all the children of this game object. So we're going to cycle through all of the bones, and then we just copy-paste the transform position and rotation, and we make it so that the Ragdoll prefab has the exact same pose. So this is the perfect task for a nice recursive function. Okay, so here it is. So we just do a for each, cycling through all of the children in this root game object. Then we try to find a clone with the exact same name as this one. And if we do find it, then we simply copy the exact position and exact rotation, and then we call the exact same function, but on this child. Now, as usual, always be careful when writing recursive functions so you don't accidentally end up with infinite loops. And when you do, make sure that you save your Unity scene. If you accidentally make an infinite loop, then Unity won't crash, so make sure you save your scene before testing. Okay, so let's try it out. So here we are, and the character is idling. Now I press the button, and yep, the Ragdoll spawns in the exact same pose and falls down. Alright, awesome. Here I made it play a running animation to make sure that it is indeed working, so as soon as I press space at any point in the animation, just press, and there you go, yep, it falls down correctly. Alright, awesome. Okay, so with this we have the basic Ragdoll working. Now for one more optional thing, we can add some force to it. So for example, if the character was killed by an explosion or a bullet, you wouldn't want it to just flop to the ground. So for that, we can do pretty much the exact same thing, so cycle through all of the children, but this time we're going to add an explosion force. Okay, here's the function. Once again, we are cycling through all of the children on this root transform. Then we just try to get a component of type rigid body. So if this object has a rigid body, then we simply call add explosion force. This one takes a certain force, a certain position, and a certain range. So we apply that, then apply the same thing to the children, and so on. And then up here, simply we spawn the Ragdoll transform. Then we match all of the child transforms, make sure the position and rotation are exactly the same, and then we just apply the explosion to the Ragdoll. So we just need to play around these fields. So specifically over here for the position. Now, if we had an actual explosion in the game, or maybe a bullet hit position, then we would use that. Here in this demo, let's just look at a fixed point just to be able to see what this does. So there we go, let's place a point somewhere in front and slightly underneath. Okay, so that looks like a decent point. So I'm just going to copy this. Alright, so here's my explosion point. Let's test. So here we are, and the character is idle. Now I press the button, and yep, there you go, turns into a Ragdoll and jumps back. So really all it takes is just playing around all these fields. So you'd use the explosion position or bullet position, then whatever force you need, whatever range, and so on. And again, here it is on the run animation, and I press space, and yep, there you go, turns into a Ragdoll, falls down, really nice, really satisfying. Alright, awesome. So there you have it. That's how you can easily make a Ragdoll for any of your characters. It's pretty simple to do, and it always makes your game feel just a tiny bit better, so go ahead and use it wherever it makes sense.